And we're very lucky as part of TMS to be joined by Mark Ramprakash, one of only 25 men to have scored 100 first-class centuries. And now is your chance to take part in Ask Ramps. And we're going to ask him some questions. If you want to get your questions in, you can email us at tms@bbc.co.uk or use at bbctms on social media. Get your questions in. The first question for you, Ramps, is from Martin in Brighton, who says, do you think you'll be the last batsman to score 100 first-class hundreds? And if so, how proud would that make you feel?
Martin, what a question, just to open up. That was a nice little leg stump half volley, isn't it? I hope that all the questions are as friendly as that. Well, for me to... personally, to finally get to 100 hundreds, I remember being at Headingley, and Darren Gough was the captain of Yorkshire, and he was there playing, and it was wonderful to have him there. And Surrey were battling for a draw, and of course, it took a while to sink in. Actually, that it'd taken a long time to get there, over 20 years. And I guess my view was, and this is an honest view, is that. It was a reward for sort of longevity, for retaining a love of the game. Not always, it sort of came and went to a degree throughout the career. But certainly in the latter part of the career, I got back to having a love of the game and not taking the game for granted, really enjoying what I was doing, because so many of my friends and mates, they had proper jobs and were sort of working 9 till 5, So playing a sport for a living was tremendously privileged to do that. So I think it was a reward for longevity and the sort of practice and training that I managed to do. But at the same time, I realised that it'd come about pretty much as a consequence of that longevity and the fact that I played my cricket in England, and we had the first class structure, and you got the opportunity to play a lot of matches. So I was very, very grateful for that. As for the continuing debate about whether people will get close to that or achieve it, it looks unlikely, just purely because times are changing, and the first class, the emphasis on first class cricket really seems to be changing. We see that with the pop-up T20 leagues all over the place, and the prioritisation. I nearly said that.
Nearly.
Right? Prioritising commercial, I think, probably means where. The short format is getting a preference, and although there's been a slight redress in the balance of playing more championship cricket, we hope throughout the season, not just bookending it in April and in September, it's made life very, very difficult for batsmen. And I keep particular eye on people that I've worked with throughout county cricket, so people like Sam Robson and David Milan and people like that, and they're very, very good players, but they are finding conditions in recent years very, very difficult. So I think the chances of achieving something like that are weighted in favour that it won't happen, but it's not because the players aren't good enough. It's just the format and the pitches and things like that.
We often see now certain players are kind of labelled test specialists or long form specialists. I mean, maybe someone like that has a chance, like somebody who focuses on the longer game and eschews the riches, as it were, of the T20 game.
Yeah. Definitely, I think you're absolutely right. I think it would be that type of person who has got more chance. So someone like Ian Bell, for example, who is still continuing to play for Warwickshire and is absolute class player, and still wants to do well. If he can retain his fitness and his motivation, there's absolutely no reason why he can't continue into his late 30s, early 40s. No reason whatsoever. I suppose out here, Dominic Sibley, of course, now playing international cricket, maybe his chances will become less. If he was playing a lot of county cricket, then he would absolutely have because he has a love of batting, doesn't he?
He does.
He doesn't give it away, court cover. You've got to work very, very hard to get him out.
It's interesting. When you think about your own career, Mark, in your 20s, you had this noticeably more aggressive temperament, and then you kind of mellowed a little bit as your career went on. How much of that do you think impacted on, how much more time you spent in the middle and the way you approached it? Was it like a genuine temperament switch, or is it just something people imagined?
Gosh, yeah, that's... where do I start with that?
You had the nickname at the club level, right? That you used
to... and I think that really it came about. I think that in my 20s, it came about through expectation. So I remember being selected for my debut test at 21 in the first test of a 5-test series against West Indies, who was still, reasonably good at that time. Ambrose Walsh Marshall and the off-spinner Patrick Patterson.
Quite handy.
They were pretty good. So I guess that was a tough initiation. I mean, when I look back at that, I think as a professional player, you always look first at what you could have done better. Mm-hmm. But when I do look back, now that I'm in the coaching and have to a degree have been involved in sort of selection chats and stuff like that, when you introduce a young player, you're hoping to introduce them at ideally a time when they will make the transition and make the jump. It's not always possible, we know that, but I wonder what the England selectors were thinking then in terms of introducing a young batter into that series, because it was always going to be hugely challenging. But of course you don't get to pick and choose. Nasser Hussain, of course, he went to the Caribbean the previous winter, and that was incredibly tough. So good that they picked, I suppose, young players. But I do think that more recently we've tried to introduce players when they're more likely to have an opportunity to settle down and play well. I think then being in and out, suffering with a sort of doubt. And not sure of whether I belonged at that international level. A lot of pressure came on to me. Some of it obviously put on to myself by myself. Mm-hmm. But you're in the spotlight. Every Tom, Dick and Harry has an opinion about your game. And so that, what you're talking about there, it was a kind of a culmination of factors that came together that actually made cricket not very enjoyable for quite a long time. And I was in and out of the international arena, and every time I was picked again, having been dropped, the pressure increased. So it was very difficult to handle. But happily, I managed to sort of keep buggering on, if you like, for Middlesex, keep trying to score runs and enjoying that, and trying to keep knocking on the door. So it was a difficult time. To get back to your question, I think in my 30s, I certainly got a better way of feeling focused but relaxed, and other life changes come along, children, and perhaps a better balance in my life, took all of the focus off, all my eggs in one basket with cricket.
Interesting. Andy?
Well, Ram, I was going to ask, do you think if you'd played the start of your career in the era of central contracts, that would have made things easier for you? And your first test summer was, you batted very well for a long time against one of the best pace attacks that's ever come to this country, and then you went to New Zealand and you weren't picked in the team. Was that, did you feel that was the sort of start of almost those doubts that you were talking about?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think throughout the West Indies series, I had a top score of 29. I played 5 tests. I didn't really feel particularly nervous in that series. I enjoyed it. I didn't have great expectation on myself, and then I missed out against Sri Lanka last test of the summer, and that was the start really. Yeah, being left out in New Zealand, coming back for the first test the following summer against Pakistan, getting naught at Edgbaston, dropped, then coming back later in the series, struggled. And that's really when the self-doubts crept in. And, there's a lot of discussion about mental toughness and the definition. And there are apparently a lot of very different definitions of mental toughness. But I would say that for me, looking back at that time, I lost the ability to think clearly. So it would come to an international match, full house. I'd really be wanting to do very well. And I remember one occasion at the Oval where I was just so nervous, and Wazam Akram was at the top of his mark, and a little voice said to me, well, just push forward, no matter what, just push forward. And I went forward, and it was a full toss, and I missed it, LBW. And that's kind of what happened, really. And so, although there were some bright spots away, I remember in Perth in '95, I flew over there from the A Tour and did okay. Yes, it was a very up and down experience for me. I think when players come into a new environment, you're really hoping to help them settle down, and that's why a lot of the time now England invite players to come along and experience the Test match. They're not selected, but they come along and spend a bit of time. So when I was coaching, Paul Farbrace was very, very keen on getting talented players who perhaps they felt may have a future at international level to come to the Test match for a day or two, maybe watch a bit of practice, be around on the first day. And I think that's the sort of thing that can really help players settle down, that if selection does come their way. And I guess the central contract system, I mean, the beauty of it was it gave England a real team feel. And I think in the 90s it would be fair to say that, we had so many coming and going. I mean, often we said goodbye at the end of a Test match, not really knowing that we would see each other the following week. So I think the central contract system gives players that a little bit of continuity, more of a team focus at the start of, say, an English summer, that the players will be in and around that international arena, and that their preparation and practice will be aimed at the challenges that the tourists will provide, as opposed to perhaps in the 90s where we were still going back and playing county cricket. And, there's famous stories of, I remember actually playing a Test match at Lord's, finishing on the Monday, and on that night, Middlesex got a coach down to Cornwall to play a NatWest game the following morning. So we arrived in Cornwall about 1:30 in the early morning, and we were up at 8:30 to go to the ground and start at 10:30 a NatWest knockout match.
Wow.
So very, very different times.
Very different times indeed. We're talking to Mark Ramprakash. Make sure you get your questions in. I'm sorry I haven't read so many reader questions. We're feeling a bit sort of greedy here, but we've got lots of time. The weather is still pretty diabolical here, so we're going to be talking to Mark Ramprakash to get your questions in. We've got another one here from Faraz Beg in Mumbai, all the way in Mumbai, who says, you were in a partnership with Mark Butcher at Headingley in 2001 while chasing over 300 in the fourth innings to beat Australia. Have you ever seen anyone chase better than he did on that day, except of course for Lara or maybe Ben Stokes last year? And why couldn't he replicate his potential enough more often? Was it something technically different in that innings from Mark Butcher?
Faraz, you know your cricket and you've got an excellent memory. And it's a really good point about Mark, actually, because, I remember, you can remember like almost a photographic memory of certain experiences in your career. And I can remember Mark, cutting hard, McGrath and Lee in that innings. And he just had the bit between his teeth. He was like, he often, you'll hear this phrase, in the zone or in the bubble. And he certainly was just in a world of his own there. And it was almost as though he had thrown caution to the wind. He was incredibly confident and almost feeling that, I'm going to go down. If I'm going to get out, I'm going to go down swinging here. And it was a fantastic innings, high class innings. I mean, you look back at that Australian attack, and to play in that manner, to take the attack to them. Rarely has people played in such an aggressive manner to that attack. I think Mark, I remember him with the advent of T20, which was quite soon after that innings. And he really enjoyed the introduction of T20 because he was having a net at the Oval one day, and he really freed up and was hitting balls over the top of the bowler's head, and that's how he has those shots, and he could play like that as a kid. But sometimes you get caught up in first class cricket and trying to play in a more correct, orthodox, conservative way. Mm-hmm. He was put at number 3 for England, and he did a great job. But it is that very, very tricky balance to get when you're playing Test cricket and you encounter different conditions and you want to try and be consistent, is how you adapt. And some days, I guess Mark at Headingley was just feeling great, seeing the ball really well, and he sort of let himself go a little bit. But other times, perhaps if it's a more tricky day, perhaps at Headingley with overcast weather, it may not be possible.
Andy?
Well, he also did have a lot of consistency from the start of the 2001 summer, before which he'd had a very difficult time over previous sort of 10 or 15 tests, 30 tests, average 46, 600s, 11 other 50. So for sort of good, his 3-year peak, he actually was a very consistent Test match player.
Yeah, absolutely. And very, very fond memories, I'm sure, for a lot of Surrey fans watching him as well. Another question from Richard Folds. Given that your 2 Test hundreds were against Walsh and Ambrose in Barbados and Warne and McGrath at the Oval, is it fair to say you saved your best for the best? Is motivation a factor, Rams?
Richard, I wish I could say that it was, but no, I think, I look back very fondly on those innings, obviously. I think anyone's dream when they're growing up, if they love cricket, is to try and score 100 for the country, and I was no different. I remember playing that little test match game, like a little Subbuteo game, when I was about 6 or 7. And, my dad and I, we used to write down the teams, and, I'd have names like, Tony Gregg and Alan Knott and Derek Underwood in my team. And, I'd seen them on the television, Bob Woolmer, get 100 in the 75 and 76 series. And to then go on and finally achieve getting 100 in Barbados, that was a wonderful thing that, you can never really be taken away from you. And because I'd had a few ups and downs, it's fair to say, for the previous 7 years after my debut, that was particularly satisfying. I think, it was just finally nice to get one back on, Messrs Ambrose and Walsh. I always get asked, actually, who was the most difficult opponent. I get asked about who's the quickest, and I say, well, there's a lot of different spells that I can remember from very quick bowlers, but the most awkward bowler, if I could take one bowler out of my career, it'd be Mr. Walsh. And it's nothing personal because he's such a lovely guy, but he was very, very awkward to face. And I found that because he was so tall, he had an awkward action, he could bowl long spells, and he always seemed to be bowling when I came into bat. So, Courtney, nothing personal. But,
it's not just yourself. I'm sure there's a lot of other batsmen who would have who would like to see the back of him. But getting those hundreds, I mean, it must have really, been sort of a feeling of vindication, really, because you've done it against who are the very best of that era, people who, as you say, have tormented you. To have that moment where you come back, like, do you remember the exact moment you got you pushed the ball out and you got your first century in Test cricket? Do you remember the feeling?
Yes, that's right. I mean, Nixon McLean was playing in that match, and I'd come, I think I was 80 not out over at Barbados, and the following morning we resumed, and Walsh bowled, I think, for about an hour and 20 minutes one end, and, it was very difficult, even though the pitch was very good and there was not a lot of movement, certainly compared to English conditions, but I sort of inched my way closer, and then Nixon McLean came on, and shortish ball, which I'd done a lot of practice on, actually, in preparation for the Caribbean that year, is that the ball is going to be about waist height or above. Mm-hmm. And I'd done a lot of practice, not necessarily playing a lot of pull shots, but playing a lot of straight bat forcing shots, because that tends to be their natural length, especially against tall bowlers. So it was a ball that I feel I'd sort of practiced for, at least. Yeah. And so the preparation had paid off. And then it was clearly a lot of elation. Of course, there were so many English people in the ground as well. Yeah. I mean, it was incredible, the support. And it's really nice, actually. I still get people come up and say, I was in Barbados, in 1998. And that's lovely to reminisce.
Something you'll remember forever, and as will many cricket fans. Ed in Bloxham says, how important is dressing room culture and individuals fitting in amongst the team in terms of ongoing selection? Seems as though Jos Buttler is considered an integral team member and secure of a place despite constantly ending up in negative in terms of runs scored versus runs conceded in a given test match. Do you think personality was ever a factor in selection during your time? Well, Ed, I think you might be being a little bit unkind to Jos Buttler there, but that is quite interesting. Personality, how does that factor in when you're picking your team? We know England have this history of reintroducing players, and I'm thinking of Kevin Peterson specifically, but I mean, that must play some part, and you don't always pick your best 11 players for their ability, do you? That
is a great question, and I think I've seen a huge change over my time in cricket. So when I came in, say, to the Middlesex dressing room, 1987, Mike Gatting was captain, and it was a very boisterous dressing room, I can tell you. People did not hold back. If they had something to say, they said it. And Gat kind of encouraged that, really, and he felt it was better off that people get it off their chest, have it out and then move on. And I mean, that was the important thing, of course, is that you're able to get it out there and then move on. And we did. And Middlesex were hugely successful. But it wasn't one of these, lovey-dovey kind of, dressing rooms where everyone got on. There was a lot of strong characters in there, and you had to be a strong character to kind of survive and do well. There was a lot of hard Mickey taking as well if you didn't do well. So a lot of characters didn't like it, and so, a lot of characters didn't flourish in that environment. But that's just the way it was back then. I think more recently, I remember doing the level 4 coaching course in 2006, and there was a lot of discussion about attitude versus talent. And do coaches go for the talented youngster who perhaps is, maybe a bit rough around the edges, or do you go for the guy who's got the right attitude and that, he's committed? And of course, I think in recent times there's been a lot of emphasis put on character. You constantly hear it spoken about, that he's a good bloke and he's a well-rounded person. And I always marvel at how articulate and balanced the England team is at the moment. The individuals within there and what they have to cope with and the spotlight that they're under. I always think they come across brilliantly in the media. Someone like Ollie Pope, who we heard from this morning, he's a very articulate young man who speaks very sensibly and in a balanced way for someone so young in this international environment. However, are we to a degree missing out on some of the rough diamonds? That would be my worry as a coach. But I think that there's much more emphasis now on environment, people fitting into the environment and wanting a happy environment so that people can flourish. But every coach will have their own opinion about the importance of that, and at what point does a player need to be left out, even though he may be good for the environment, if he's not fulfilling his role in the side.
Oh, fascinating insights from Mark Ramprakash. If you're listening to us right now, we're still waiting for play to start today. The start's been delayed because of bad weather here at Southampton. It's 223 for 9 overnight. No change. We'll bring you any updates as and when they come. But for now, we're talking to Mark Ramprakash. If you've got questions for him, please do send them in to tms@bbc.co.uk or using our social media tag, BBC TMS. Emma in Windsor has another question for you, Rabs. What is the secret to long-term success? The film The Edge shows a side who raced to success then fell away, revealing perhaps a corrosive, divided dressing room. Did you experience a cultural reformation geared more towards morale and welfare when you were in the England coaching staff? Did you see The Edge, by the way?
I haven't. I've only seen clips. I haven't seen the whole thing through, so probably not best qualified to talk about that specifically. But not that I'm dodging the question here, but I think it's a really interesting question, and I can probably relate that best to my time at Surrey, actually, because when this Surrey side got together probably in the early 90s, so people like Martin Bicknell, Mark Butcher, Alex Stewart, Graham Thorpe, Alistair Brown, they came through together, and then Adam Hollyoak joined there, and they had these wonderfully talented players, all similar age, coming up together. And from what I understand, Keith Medlicott, the coach, when he became coach, he was quite hands-on. He had a pretty young team, but he was quite hands-on, and he felt that they needed a firm hand to sort of help guide them. Adam, of course, gravitated to be a fantastic leader. And then, as they became more mature and knew their game, and the coach could then... The skill of the coach was to back off a little bit and allow them the space as mature young men who were quality cricketers to make, to make their own decisions. And again, the team flourished. We may have dropped off the wrong end of it, if you like. So the end of the story, I guess, was unfortunately the leader of the side, Adam, had this personal tragedy that affected him and his attitude greatly, which perhaps knocked us off course a little bit. And that was where I think a change in the leadership, that perhaps the coach could have then come back in and been a little bit more firm in the way that he guided the group there. So look, it's a really tough thing for a coach to gauge how to be. Coaches have got to be authentic, haven't they? They've got to be, you get your authoritative ones and you get your laissez-faire, very laid-back ones. I think a quality coach might be able to adapt to the group that he has in front of him. Mm-hmm. So it may be that if you have a youngish group, that winning is not necessarily everything.
Sure.
You're looking for progress within the group, within the individual performances, hopefully, and maybe over time that will lead to to winning. Of course, if you take over a mature side with a lot of quality players, you're absolutely hoping to win pretty much straight away.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a very interesting mentality, and I recommend the film if you get a chance, Mark. We might have plenty of time over the course of this test match, so you might get some time in to watch it. Phoebe Jones has a lighter question for you. Have you taken or used any of the techniques you learnt in Strictly Come Dancing into your cricket coaching?
Wow. Now, I was surprised it took that long, actually.
We may have edited the order a little bit.
Okay. Well, thank you for that. Yes. Yes. I mean, obviously, one or two comments about dancing down the wicket and things like that come to mind. I guess a question I often get asked is about the crossover. Does anything transfer? So I remember doing Strictly, which was way back in 2006, and at the end of the season, 2006. Surrey had got promoted and I'd had a good season, and I went along to the dance studio actually to meet my partner, Karen Hardy, and this was in Old Street, and the cameras were there rolling, and I met Karen, and she took me through a few steps of cha-cha-cha, for about an hour, and then she sort of took out her phone and she said, look, Mark, can I take your mobile number? And I thought, yeah, still got it. And, she said, look, what's your surname? So I said, well, it's long. So she wrote in Long.
Excellent.
So she had absolutely no clue of what my surname was and pretty much what I did, but that kind of sort of broke the ice between us, and I had a great time. And what I realized was that within dancing, of course, you're on your feet a lot of the time practicing. You need great stability and mobility and balance. So yeah, there's plenty that there's a crossover, particularly with batting actually. I must just say as well, from memory, is that waiting in the wings to go on, now that was nerves.
Is it comparable to waiting to go out there to bat?
Yes, very much so. But oh my God, at least batting, I've got some idea of what I was meant to be doing. I mean, the dancing was it was dreadful. I mean, on a Saturday performance, I'd go to the BBC and we'd have a dress rehearsal in the afternoon. But I'd have to watch Football Focus, at 12:30, first of all, and then. It'd get to 6 o'clock or whatever, and of course it's live. It's a live TV show, and I would know very, very quickly in the first few seconds of the routine whether it was going to be a reasonable night or not. But I did try and I called upon actually some of the things that I'd learnt in cricket when I first met Steve Ball, which was the England sports psychologist in 1998. That was the first time they'd employed a sports psychologist, and. We had a meeting for about an hour in Guyana around the swimming pool there, and it was amazing how he kind of gave me a little bit of a strategy, a bit of a framework to cope with the nerves, and I did call upon that when it came to doing the dance show. Yeah,
that's interesting. I mean, how often do you meet people and like in a professional environment, even in an environment like this, and people say to you, "Show us a few steps"? Like, does that happen often?
Well, I wish I could. I do remember an occasion in Newcastle after the show. So I went up to Newcastle for a function. There was about 400 people there in a black tie event, and we'd had the dinner, and they said, "Look, Mark, can you come up and help with the auction?" And they did the 10 auction items, and then they said, over the loudspeaker, they said, right, now, will the lady who bid to dance with Mark please come up? And they started playing this music, and I don't know what they expected from me, but we did a bit of a two-step for about 30 seconds, and then that was it, because, of course, you don't really learn to dance on Strictly. You kind of learn a series of steps, and my partner used to push me around and get me in the right place, but... Yeah, there's no way I could have done a full-on routine. So that was a bit of a letdown, I'm afraid.
That's interesting. We've got a question here from Fred Pennell from Wimborne Cricket Club. And he says, I've been lucky enough to play a couple of football games for the wonderful Corinthian Casuals Football Club with Ramps and can attest to his competitive spirit. Westminster School sticking in the memory. But it all pales into insignificance to his somewhat charged last ball catch and shirt-wielding reaction at the T20 match at the Rose Bowl, right here where we are now. He's been taking a bit of banter, mildly put, from the partisan evening crowd, and in his defence, the assembled loved his response. Does he recall the evening and the first point? On the first point, how much did he enjoy his football, knowing that alongside other famous cricketing Corinthians such as Alex Stewart, he might be on show at all times?
Well, Fred, thanks for bringing all that up. And yes, fond memories, actually. I mean, there's several things there, I guess. The Corinthian Casuals, fond memories of making a few appearances for them. And that team used to go around playing a lot of the school first 11s. And they were very competitive matches, I have to say. And Westminster were particularly feisty first 11. And I remember they had a couple of teachers on the sideline who was sort of thought they were Sir Alex Ferguson or something. They were straight into the ref, and it was a competitive match. But I think I played football from a young age, and I had a love of the game for that, and I think it gave me many things. You know, it gives you a natural fitness base, athleticism, but you have to have that competitive spirit. Of course, it comes out in different ways with different people, but I don't mind seeing a bit of fire and passion in the belly from some youngsters, and I think sometimes, we're maybe a bit too quick to coach that out of people, and that's kind of what I was alluding to earlier about, rough diamonds and looking to polish them and work with them and help educate them, really. For me, I had that love of football, and that was great fun for me, and it gave me that balance I was talking about. Football in the winter, cricket in the summer. So that was great fun. And in terms of the T20, well, of course, that's the passion and emotion, isn't it? I mean, of course, it was here. It wasn't quite a full house. There were one or two more people in here than
now
today. Yeah. But I can remember there was an area, actually, as I look out onto the field. So if you come out from the pavilion, on the left, kind of square of the wicket, there was a few guys down there, and they were just giving me a little bit of stick throughout the 20 overs. And we were struggling, Surrey, and we hadn't made a particularly big score in the first innings. In our innings. And, it looked like we were going to, probably lose again. And we'd had a pretty rough old time. And so I think the ball was pushed to me in the last over, and I managed to somehow pick it up, throw down the stumps. And then I kind of ran over to them just to let them know that, I was quite happy with the result and that we'd won the game. So I wouldn't recommend it, though, really. In hindsight, I do cringe.
Keep them coming. We're enjoying these questions. We're talking to Mark Ramprakash. Get your questions in, and we'll keep posing to him. The next one is from Chris in North Wales, who, like me, is a lifelong Middlesex supporter. He previously lived in St John's Wood. He says, I remember a one-day cup final, I think in 1987, when he came in with a score around 20 for 4, and this unknown youngster won the game for Middlesex with a half-century. I think I recall a partnership with John Embury. Am I right in thinking you were around 17 at the time? Was that your debut? And what are your memories of the occasion? Why did you move to our arch rival Surrey? I was so disappointed. You know what, Chris? I'm with you. I too was very disappointed when that happened. I was kind of surprised it wasn't as controversial at the time, to be honest with you. But do you remember that match, Rams?
Well, I do remember the match. I'm talking of a controversial. I mean, it wasn't quite Sol Campbell moving from Tottenham to Arsenal, but there's some. It's amazing. Yeah, there are still some Middlesex supporters who really hold that against me.
And rightfully so. No, I'm just kidding.
I do remember the game, 1988. And again, I go back to that Middlesex environment because I hadn't played in any of the previous rounds for the NatWest Trophy. Mm-hmm. And they were big games. I mean, they were like FA Cup games.
Sure.
And, the competition was a fantastic competition. In fact, I wish, actually, they would reinstate it because I think it would be great to have a knockout competition. But, of course, we know that the summer is so congested. But it was a great competition to play in and, again, a great competition to progress in. Surrey had Middlesex had beaten Surrey actually in the semi-final, and Keith Brown had got a really valuable 30 not out to take the team home. And I remember I'd got into the side and played a few 4-day games just before the final. And I remember coming back round from Hove on a Friday night, and we'd just finished playing a 4-day game against Sussex, and I was in the car with Norman Cowans, and I remember asking him, what do you think? Have I got a chance of playing? And he was kind of a little bit non-committal. And on the Saturday morning, made my way into Lord's, and of course, that was a full house. There was a lot of people in there, and they were big occasions. And anyway, Middlesex went over to the nursery, and of course, in those days, you had to warm up in your whites. None of this training gear. You had to have your whites on, do it properly. And we'd had a few catches and hit a few, and then he was just about to go out on the field to toss. So this was just before 10 o'clock, and he just, oh, by the way, Ramps, you're playing, you're in. So
wow.
That was a pretty late call on his part. But I guess it gave me no real time to think about the occasion. But I have to give Gat, a lot of credit there, because to pick me at that age with no matches
17.
under my belt, no matches under my belt. I hadn't played in any of the previous rounds, no real experience of the one-day cricket. To play me in a final, that was a big decision, I think, for Middlesex there and for Gat. And obviously, I'll be very, very grateful to him for that opportunity. And it was a wonderful occasion because we got over the line.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a very typical Lord's final in those days, quite low scoring, massive toss to win, and against a very, very good Worcestershire side. I mean, as for the move to Surrey, how long have we got?
Well,
Yes.
it was a heck of an occasion, and you did take them over the line with that innings. Andy?
Well, I was going to ask about that that game specifically, Mike Gatting in that game, and talking about the quality of Worcestershire's side. They had an all-international bowling attack: Graham Dilley, Neil Radford, Richard Illingworth, Phil Newport. There were 15 current or future England players in the match as a whole. Can you just talk us through Mike Gatting's run-out in that game, which I think might be one of the funniest run-outs in the entire history? He was run out for naught.
Yeah, well, it wasn't funny for us at the time. I mean, we were there, and we'd lost an early wicket, and Gat had gone out. And of course, he was a fantastic player, Mike. I mean, and he probably would have been close to his peak, I reckon, at that time, 1988, and very much a gun player, world-class player. And he was at the non-striker's end, and the ball got pushed, I think, by Wilf Slack, back past the bowler, and it may have been a slightly late call, but Gat had sort of, from backing up, had sort of turned round to go back into his crease at the non-striker's end. And then Wilf said, yep, he wants to. And then Gat kind of ran up the wicket, but he wasn't really putting in the big ones, to be honest. It was a fairly casual jog up the other end. And Neil Radford, I think, who was a bit of a live wire and, quite an aggressive bowler, and he ran round and pinged it. He had a great arm. Pinged it at the wicket-keeper's end, and Gat was short, and he was caught napping a little bit, dare I say, but brilliant piece of fielding from Worcestershire, and it kind of we really wobbled then, yeah. So we were very, very happy to kind of finally get over the line.
Well, it really set the stage for that innings that so many people remember of yours. And what a way to announce yourself on that stage. Fred Brown in Haydock says, my question for Mark Ramprakash is, where was he watching last year's ICC World Cup final, and how was he feeling, and what was his reaction to England beating New Zealand? Thank you, Fred, for that question. You weren't at the ground, were you, Rams?
I was at the ground.
Okay.
Yes, I was at the ground because Gray Nichols, who I was sponsored by, they'd been running a competition, and they were at lunchtime. We went out onto the outfield there at Lord's, and several people came along and took part in a competition, and they had to hit some balls back at this target and try and dislodge the bails or something. And so I was kind of involved in that. Now, I remember it being quite a cold day, a bit overcast, and I didn't look too closely at the first innings, but I remember thinking at half-time, oh, yeah, we've got it in the bag. I felt so confident, especially given the way England had played in the previous matches, that we had this in the bag. Mm-hmm. Of course, it didn't quite work out as comfortable, as I thought it was going to be. And I wasn't aware that the rules had changed. Once it was tied in real time, I wasn't aware that. I just assumed that it would go on wickets. And so I was as surprised as a lot of people, I think, that the rule had changed. good job it had, actually.
Yeah. So where were you when that Super Over was happening? Where were you in Lords?
Well, I wasn't really watching it live. I was more in the indoor school. I'd been stationed there for a lot of the time. But I mean, of course, the noise was fantastic. And I think for me, having seen, so if I go back to the previous World Cup in 2015 and been involved in that, and then involved in the subsequent one-day series where Owen took over the reins along with Paul Farbrace, and they took on that New Zealand series, which really was a huge shift from what had gone on before. And to see those players who had come in there, I mean, a fresh face, Jason Roy, who had a quiet series against New Zealand, but of course England, you know, to their credit, absolute credit, Andrew Strauss and Morgan, Paul Farbrace, you know, they had this firm belief and vision of what they wanted to try and create, and they stuck with Jason. To see him, and of course I know Jason from his early days at Surrey as well, but to see him and all of the other players who I'd been lucky enough to see develop, you know, once picked from England, Moeen Ali and Adil Rashid and all these different guys, to see them be involved in the World Cup and go on to be winners, you know, was wonderful, because you see how much hard work and you see goes into it, and how much it means to them. And, you know, the fact that, you know, to be honest, in previous campaigns it had been so off the pace that to see this all come to fruition was magnificent.
It really was. It was quite the occasion, and you know, I remember being fortunate enough to be there myself. It was quite something to behold. Right, we've got another question from David Basterfield, and you've sort of addressed this before, but I'll ask it again because I quite like the way the question's worded, to be honest with you. I played against Mark in men's cricket when he was 12 at Parkfield. He looked superb as a batsman then and was a lovely, lovely, polite lad. Two lovelies. I played against his father in several Sunday games. He was also a lovely, charismatic man, a joy to play against. Later, I played against Mark when he was a first-class / test cricketer when he turned out for Besborough versus Acton in an end-of-season game, and he was a lovely, lovely man twice again. However, at Stanmore, he had a reputation as a bad thrower and generally an angry young man. What was that all about? What caused the change of attitude? Stroppy teenager syndrome? His words, not mine. Thank you, David. Thank you very much.
Very quick to point that out.
We're gonna be hanging out a bit. I don't want to make it awkward.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what happened at Stanmore?
Well, there was no change of attitude. I was always a passionate, you know, committed player who wanted to do his best. Now, you know, I've made reference once or twice to, you know, trying to pick talented players who are not necessarily the finished article in terms of being balanced people. Mm-hmm. And I kind of guess I'm drawing on my own experiences there. And so when I look at, you know, Middlesex and Surrey right now, and it's been the case for quite a number of years, in their academies, if they have 12 boys there between 16 and 18, definitely 11 will probably come from private schools. Why is that? Because I think that the education and the way that they are taught helps them to, one, listen to coaches and take on information, but also to articulate their thoughts. And it's a lot easier for coaches to perhaps work with them. And you get this phrase of coachability. I would argue that, are we missing out on some very, very talented players who don't necessarily fit into that easy to coach mould? And so that's what I was alluding to again when I was talking about the level 4, which I took in 2006, which was pretty much saying to coaches, pick attitude over talent, because you can do more. If someone's got the great attitude, you can do more with that. But I would say that if someone's talented for the game, that perhaps you can help educate them in other areas. So if I take that back to myself, look, I was someone who, you know, really wanted to do well, and I didn't handle disappointment very well at all. And I look back on that with disappointment, and I probably needed a bit more of a helping hand and a mentor to help me understand, you know, the right way to behave and the bigger picture. And I was perhaps a bit wrapped up in my own little world of wanting to do well. But, you know, when you're 11 and 12 and 13, you know, that's kind of what happens. And I think you need influences like that who can kind of help you deal with these different things. So I guess in terms of being a coach now, I have a great opportunity to try and help people, handle everything that goes along with, trying to do their best and pursue a dream to be as good as they can be.
Absolutely. Wonderful, wonderful stuff, Mark. Another question from Victor Lane from Guernsey. How are things in Guernsey right now? I saw a young Mark Ramprakash play a very classy innings in Guernsey many years ago and could see then that he was something special. Then in 2010, I saw him play for Surrey against Glamorgan in the 40-over competition, and Surrey made their highest ever 40-over score. Sadly, rain stopped Glamorgan chasing. Does he have any memories of these innings? What do you remember about Guernsey, Mark?
Guernsey, yeah, very firm. Very good memories of Guernsey. That was on I think a Middlesex team that went over there to tour, and a number of the counties, I think Hampshire, Sussex, Kent, maybe sent teams to Guernsey for this week of matches where everyone played everyone, and it was great fun. I remember we stayed in this massive kind of like scout hut. And we had these camp beds that really were just like on these metal wire rimmed things, very, very, very basic. And of course they lobbed everyone into this massive hall, and there was a lot of mischief that went on in it, but fond memories and some very good cricketers from Middlesex in that time. And those memories actually and those opportunities were so important to my development. So when I look back at the Middlesex Colts that I came through, and I was very lucky to start at the age of 10 in the Middlesex under-11s, but they had very well organised matches, good grounds, good pitches, good umpires, and the guys who looked after us, they weren't really coaches, but they were well-respected guys who related well, spoke well with parents, and they made the whole experience a very nice one. So I look back on those opportunities. I'm very thankful for the people involved who gave up their time to run those boys' teams, and progressing up through, Middlesex under-13s to Middlesex under-15s, and a lot of great work that goes on at that level. I'd be hugely grateful for that, really.
Yeah, incredible memories, all these wonderful memories. And thank you so much, Mark, for taking the time. It's been a pleasure, really, just chatting, and we could do this all day. We've got a couple more questions before we wrap up, but just a reminder to everybody listening in, we're talking to Mark Ramprakash. If you've got questions for him, try and sneak them in. We'll try and sneak a few more in. But the reason we're doing that is because we've not had any play at all today on the third day of the second test between England and Pakistan here at Southampton. The weather has been diabolical, just dark and drizzly, and the covers are on fully, and we just don't know when the next cricket's going to happen. But in the meantime, we're very lucky and privileged to be chatting to Mark about his career and posing your questions to him. So Peter has a question for you, Mark. Fans love seeing current or former international players playing at county level. That extra bit of quality and time that they have is a treat to watch, and you can often see is better. But is it tough to motivate yourself for domestic cricket after international cricket, and is the gap getting bigger or smaller? That's a great question.
Yeah, great question. And I guess several things come to mind there. One is that, isn't it wonderful to have Sir Alistair Cook playing at Essex? So in terms of motivation, he's not struggling for motivation. He clearly has a love of Essex and playing for Essex and that environment. And a lot of people thought that when he played that last Test match, that would be the end of him. And I think a lot of people are actually quite surprised that he's gone back and is playing for Essex. But good on him for that, and he's getting the enjoyment from it. Of course, there are other players who haven't done that, and once they've played international cricket, they do struggle to go back and for their counties perhaps and play at domestic level. So it depends a little bit on the personality. If you feel that you've achieved all you have wanted to achieve in the game, and you perhaps are running a bit low in terms of energy, and you feel your time has come, then you've got to make that decision. It's not always an easy one. I remember asking many ex-players about retirement because I was very unsure. I was still thinking, it got to 40 and 41, and I was still thinking, I kind of want to keep going. And they all said to me, you'll know when the time comes. You'll know when to retire. Well, actually, I didn't. And in the end, I probably embarked on the season in 2012 when I probably shouldn't have done. But my mindset had been for such a long time, just keep going, keep training, keep playing. But actually, I think I had run out of juice, and I'd got to sort of the middle of the season, and was given a little bit of an ultimatum by Chris Adams at Surrey, where he said, look, we're not going to pick you in the first team, so you can either play second team or go on loan. And obviously that's quite a hard thing to hear at any stage of your career. And I was lucky. I was meeting Justin Langer that afternoon, just purely by chance. Australia were in town, and he was fantastic. And because I respected him, he was able to talk to me honestly about managing the way you go out of the game. And it's such an important thing, really. And I hadn't had anyone to talk about with it. And he helped me greatly in terms of saying, actually, how do you want to go out? And do you want to go on loan, or is this the best time? And actually, the way it happened was for the best. And so I'm very thankful to him for his wise words.
That's it. And for people who don't get to bump into Justin Langer, they've just got to wait for the feeling. They've just got to wait for the feeling. We've got a couple more questions for you, Mark, and then we'll let you have some lunch. Lewis in Reading says, if it wasn't for cricket, what would your job be? And you can't say professional dancer.
No, without doubt, no. I guess I haven't really thought about this too much because although I went to college to do a couple of A-levels, I wasn't there too often, really. I was and then when I was there, at home I'd stare out my bedroom window thinking about playing cricket rather than doing my economics. So I was pretty much at that age already, 17, 18, thinking about professional cricket. In fact, I was offered a professional contract at 17 with Middlesex, so I'd already kind of gone down that path. Although, funnily enough, now I've got two daughters, and they're one of them has been to Sheffield Uni and graduated in law, and the other one, of course, well, she's meant to have had her results. She's been involved in this shambolic fiasco at the moment with the A-level results, and she's been badly affected by it. But I've always said to them, look, I think going to university is a great thing to do, and if I'd had my time again, I actually probably would have advised myself to go to university and enjoy that. And again, it could have given me a bit more balance to your life. So I think that's something that university time, maybe I might have changed and having reflected on it.
Yeah. Andy?
A question from Philip Chapman, tapping into your coaching expertise. He says most amateur players only play once a week, don't have time to practice. What would you say is the best way for them to prepare and do well in a game?
Well, yeah, it's difficult if you have limited time. I think, there's a lot of talk actually about, whether you practice what you're weak on or practice what you're good on or your strengths, for example. So I think ideally, sometimes it's good to work on your strengths. So, for example, if you're really good at driving, then, practice that and get plenty of drives. And that helps with confidence. At the same time, I do think, if you keep getting stumped or something like that, then you've got to kind of work out a way of playing spin as well. So hitting, if you can't hit loads of volume of balls, then you've got to be quite specific in the practice you do, and make it specific to the challenges that you're going to face on a Saturday. That's probably the best thing to do. So I'm involved a little bit with Stanmore CC, and I always, the players there, they really struggle against spin, and they kind of get block, and then not quite slog, but they go for a big shot. And I think a lot of players at club level particularly struggle to rotate the ball off the spinners, and that's something that I've tried to get them to think about.
There you go, good advice. And the last question for this session. It's been a great session again, Rabs. Thanks for taking the time. It's been lovely just having you here generally, and a lovely presence to have around in these times, especially when we're filling loads of gaps. And we've got the last question today, and it had to be about Strictly, obviously, right? This is from Thomas Day. He said, which current England player can you see winning Strictly Come Dancing in the future?
Oh, God, there's so many guys.
Many. I thought
there's so many. I think there's so many guys who could potentially do brilliantly. If I go back to yesteryear, Mike Gatting, I still think could do a job on Strictly. Can't you?
As a catering consultant or camera operator or
Master Chef would be better, wouldn't it?
Just you can't keep setting them up for us like that, Mark.
I just don't think. I don't know. I just see their tight okay, maybe we don't want to visualise that, but okay. If not Mike Gatting, then out of the current crop, I mean, there's a lot of good-looking young men in that dressing room. Chris Wokes is there. I mean, he's a natural athlete. Great footballer. He's really annoying, actually. He's a very good-looking young lad. He's so polite, good at golf, football, whatever you like. He could do well. I guess that those who are coming, towards the twilight stages of their careers, and Jimmy Anderson and Stuart Broad, definitely could see them getting on Strictly. And I hope they do. They'll have a great time, no question about it. I mean, I remember ringing up Darren Goff for a chat about whether I should go on Strictly, and after half an hour of listening to Darren, he was very encouraging and was saying, "Look, no, you must do it. You'll have a great time." But of course, he was very extrovert. He is very extrovert, very, very different to me. Much more introvert. So you put the spotlight on Darren, he comes alive, and it's fantastic. He's got a great personality. But for other people, it's maybe not quite as you're putting yourself out there, with the whole costumes and everything else like that. But I think that Jimmy and Broady definitely would love to see them, doing a little bit of salsa or something like that.
That'd be cool. And Stuart Broad could keep the headband. It will come in handy later,
Absolutely.
maybe, right? Thank you so much, Mark, for that. And we really appreciate that. It was a nice chat, and hopefully we'll do some more a little bit later in the series as time goes on.